folks. How's everybody doing tonight? Good. Excellent. Lee, I haven't figured out a way to incorporate you just yet, but I got about 10 minutes to do that. Everybody else was doing it. Because everybody else mentioned you, Lee. So I have to figure out a way. But listen, I'm talking about unethical banking transactions, so I'll figure it out. All right, folks. So my name is Dimitriadis. I'm a professor here at the Massachusetts School of Law. And during this particular segment, we're going to talk about unethical banking transactions as they pertain to business and corporate accounts, and more specifically with employees who have responsibility over those accounts. And we're going to end up answering the question, who pays the price? So let me start off by asking you, in the last 15 days, how many of you have used Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, Zelle to make some type of cash? Yeah, most of you, right? And in that same 15-day period, how many of you have written out a check to make a payment? Okay, that was about, I would say, like a fifth, actually, of the people who raised their hand. And that's not surprising because, as we've talked about throughout this, and Professor Devlin mentioned how this is more of a topic for your grandparents, but the use of checks, or at least paper checks, has declined in the last 10, 15 years or so. And so what I wanted to do was make sure that we sort of understood the process before I segue into the use of the checks in the corporate scenario and the responsibility of the employees when they're handling those types of checks. And so first and foremost, at their issuance, checks are written orders to pay money. That's what those checks are doing. The bank customer is ordering their bank to pay out that amount of money. The transfer of the check, regardless of how many times it happens, is called the negotiation. The presentment is when that check is sent over to the bank for payment. And those are the three stages of the life of the check. And then depending on how those stages go, that's how we're going to determine responsibility and which party is going to be responsible for that particular check. And so at its simplest form, as I said, a check is an order by the bank customer to the bank to pay out the money to the person shown on the check to receive the money that is indicated on the check. And the banks are required to follow their customers' orders exactly. And if they fail to follow their customer orders exactly, then the bank, generally speaking, as we'll see some other scenarios, will suffer the loss. So let's take a look at, and that's the handout that I gave you, a check, what a paper check would look like for those of you who haven't seen one. And we're going to keep working with this scenario, and we're going to keep coming back to this one. But let's take a look at the players, and you can follow along on the paper. I'm just going to put it up on the slide as well. So what we have here, just to understand who the parties are, on the upper left-hand corner, we have the account holder. So in this case, we have Boss Inc., we have their contact information, and the bottom right-hand side, we have their authorized agent who has signed this check. And what they have done with this check is they have ordered their bank, who's the First National Bank, to pay $5,000, the amount of the check, to the named payee for this particular check, that is Diane M. Sullivan. That's what this customer has ordered their bank to do, to pay Diane M. Sullivan $5,000. So those are the players. So let's assume then that the bank has made a mistake. And instead of paying out $5,000, they've paid out $50,000. The payee now has taken the money. She's off vacationing to Hawaii. She's never to be seen again. Why would you want to come back? So the question is, who's going to be responsible for the $45,000 difference? Easy answer. Who do you think is going to be responsible? The bank, right? Not just because they made the mistake, but also because of what I told you earlier. The customer ordered the bank to pay out $5,000, and they didn't do that. They did not pay out the $5,000 that they were ordered to do so, and so of course they're going to be responsible for that $45,000 difference. Now instead, let's assume that the bank paid out the correct amount of money. So they received that check that I've handed you, they paid out the correct amount of money, but they didn't pay it out to the correct person. They paid it out to someone who was impersonating Diane M. Sullivan. So if that's the case, if they paid out the correct amount of money, but they paid it out to the wrong person, who do you think is going to be responsible for that loss? Well, because the imposter has taken the money and has disappeared, the bank has the option to go after the imposter. If they're able to locate the person who they paid out, who they weren't supposed to pay out, if they're able to locate that person, they're going hopefully be able to recover that lost money. But if they're not, then it is in fact correct that the bank is the one that's going to suffer the loss. The asterisk, of course, being there because the bank always has the option to go after whoever they paid out the money to in order to recover that loss. So in that previous scenario with the imposter, like I said, the bank has the option of looking for that imposter and hopefully being able to recover, assuming, of course, the bank is the one who ended up paying out the money. And so the question then is, well, why would the bank suffer the loss for the imposter's check fraud? And it goes back to what I told you, right? The customer ordered the bank to pay out the money to Diane M. Sullivan, and the company did not do that. The bank did not do that. And because of that, the bank is going to end up suffering the loss. What they're going to have to do is they're going to have to recredit the customer's account, because they took that money out of the customer's account, and they paid it to the imposter. And now that the bank customer, will call up and say, hey, listen, Diane M. Sullivan never got her money. What happened? Because the money is missing from my account. And because of that, the bank is going to have to recredit that amount into the account. And unless they can track that imposter, they will suffer the loss. And so it sounds like the bank is the one that is going to be suffering the loss, whether it was the mistake or whether it was the imposter. But the bank is not always going to be responsible when check fraud is involved. So let's see some scenarios where the bank might be able to escape liability. So going back to this check, but we're putting on a little twist to it, where now what we have is a forgery of the signature of the agent, the authorized agent who signed the check. And so the forger now, of course, has taken the money and has disappeared, so we're never going to see them again. So now the question becomes, who's going to be responsible for the $5,000 when the bank customer's signature has been forged? What do you think? Is it going to be the bank again? No. Who's it going to be? Who is it? The forger? They're gone. We can't find them. We've looked and looked. Go ahead. The company. What do you think? Okay.
The bank usually has signature cards to verify who they're going to be having set up to, so you can verify the signature card and cash that is check, they would be held liable for it.
Everyone's favorite answer, right? When we don't know what the answer is, it always depends. It depends, and it truly, truly depends. What it depends on. The bank will suffer the loss yet again if the forgery is of the agent's signature and the company informs the bank, typically it's within 1 year of that forgery. However, as I told you, I promised you earlier, there are scenarios where the bank can actually escape liability. And one of those scenarios would be under the employee endorsement rule. And the employee endorsement rule we find under the UCC, it's under section 3405 of the Uniform Commercial Code. And if we can satisfy that rule, then it's going to be the employer and not the bank that's going to be responsible for that fraudulent endorsement. So let's take a look at 3405 and see what it says. So if a person pays an instrument or takes it for value in good faith, and the employer entrusted the employee with responsibility over the instruments, and it is the employee or someone who's been working with that employee who makes that fraudulent endorsement, then the employer is going to be responsible to the person who paid on that instrument or took it for value. So if we can satisfy that standard, then the bank is not going to have to recredit the customer's account. They're, in essence, going to shift the liability over to the employer. So what do we mean employees with responsibility over checks? So generally, it's when the employer has granted, and this is all under the code, has granted the employee with various authorities to sign or endorse instruments, to process instruments, to prepare those instruments, supply information, just generally any type of authority granted over those instruments where that employee would be responsible for those particular those checks. Responsibility does not include merely having access to it. So if I were to run downstairs and grab a stack of MSL checks and start cashing in, paying my bills, MSL is not going to incur liability under the employee endorsement rule because I don't have responsibility over checks or instruments at MSL. But when you can satisfy what the code sets as the standard for employees with responsibility over instruments, then the employer is in all likelihood going to suffer the loss when you have those types of employees who are taking liberties, of course, with the company finances. So we have this check written on the corporate account. We have the forgery of the agent's signature on the front of that instrument, which is indicating, of course, that someone other than someone who's authorized to sign those checks has signed the check. And so the question then becomes who's going to be responsible for the $5,000 that was paid out by the bank. And of course, the answer is that it depends. It depends on whether the person who did this forgery had in fact responsibility over the instruments or someone who did not. And if they didn't, if it were, say, someone like myself who were to run downstairs and grab those checks, then we fall back to what we talked about earlier, right? Where it's the bank is responsible to pay out to the money that the customer had ordered them to do so. And if I'm going to be writing out checks and I'm going to be signing them when I don't have responsibility, well, what has the bank customer, what has MSL told their bank to pay? Nothing, because I don't have that type of responsibility. And so with that instance, under the employee endorsement rule, they would not be responsible. So a few things to think about conducting background checks before hiring employees, especially the ones who will have responsibility over instruments. You want to place some safeguards, checks and balances to avoid any unsupervised or unfettered control over company finances. You want to be monitoring the employees and especially those who have responsibility over instruments. Conduct some frequent financial audits just to make sure that the numbers are adding up. And then also you might want to consider a business insurance policy that covers forgery, fraud, and the like. And so thank you. If you have any question, you can email any one of my colleagues. Just kidding. My email is on there. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the night.